Winged soldier expelled for saving alien girl. Now their forbidden love begins. The sky above the jagged cliffs of Varuna blazed with streaks of fire and smoke. Jake tightened his grip on the controls of his wingsuit, the sleek metal humming as he darted through the chaos. He was a Sky Vanguard, one of the few humans trusted to fight alongside the Galactic Alliance. His wings, shimmering panels of alloy and energy, cut through the air, a symbol of his skill and pride. Below, the war raged on, a clash between the Alliance and the ruthless Krenar invaders. Jake's headset crackled with static, and Commander Holt's voice broke through. "Vanguard unit, pull back. That's an order. The Krenar are overwhelming the sector." Jake's eyes narrowed behind his visor. Through the haze, he spotted a crashed Alliance scout ship, its hull torn open like a wound. A faint signal blinked on his scanner, a single life sign. Someone was still alive down there. "Sir," Jake replied, his voice steady. "There's a survivor. I'm going in." Holt's response was sharp. "Negative, soldier. The Krenar are converging. You'll be cut off. Fall back now." Jake hesitated, his thumb hovering over the comm switch. He'd followed orders his whole life, through training, through battles. But this felt wrong. Leaving someone to die wasn't what he'd signed up for. With a flick, he muted the comms and angled his wings downward. The wind roared past him as he dove, dodging blasts of Krenar artillery. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the thrill of doing what he knew was right. The ground rushed up to meet him, and he landed hard, boots crunching into the ash-covered soil. The wrecked ship was just ahead, its emergency lights flickering weakly. Jake sprinted forward, his wings folding neatly against his back. Energy bolts zipped past, one grazing his arm, but he didn't stop. Inside the ship he found her. She was slumped against a console, her violet skin shimmering faintly under the dim lights. Her silver eyes widened as she saw him, her breath shallow. She was an Illyrian, one of the Alliance's alien allies, with delicate features and a presence that seemed to glow even in the wreckage. "Human," she whispered, her voice soft but clear through her translator. "Jake, Sky Vanguard," he said, kneeling beside her. "Can you move?" She tried to stand, but her leg buckled, a deep cut oozing dark blood. "Not fast enough," she murmured. Jake didn't hesitate. He scooped her into his arms, surprised at how light she felt despite her tall frame. "Hold on," he said, activating his wings. They flared to life, energy pulsing through them, as he launched into the sky. The Illyrian clung to him, her arms around his neck, her warmth seeping through his suit. "Anlila," she said over the rush of wind. "Thanks for not leaving me." Jake grinned, banking to avoid a Krenar drone. Couldn't let a good story end too soon. But the escape wasn't clean. A Krenar fighter locked onto them, its weapons blazing. Jake twisted midair, shielding Lila with his body as a blast clipped his wing. Sparks flew, and the suit's systems screeched in protest. He gritted his teeth, pushing the damaged wing to its limit as he aimed for an Alliance outpost on the horizon. They crashed through the outpost's perimeter, tumbling into a heap as alarms blared around them. Jake staggered to his feet, helping Leela up as Alliance soldiers surrounded them. Her silver eyes met his, a mix of gratitude and worry in them. Before he could say anything, Commander Holt stormed forward, his face red with fury. "You disobeyed a direct order, Jake. You risked a Vanguard asset for one life." Jake straightened, meeting Holt's glare. "A life's worth more than protocol, sir." Holt's jaw tightened. "You're done. Hand over the wings. You're expelled from the Vanguard, effective immediately." The words hit like a punch, but Jake didn't flinch. Soldiers stepped forward, stripping the wings from his back. The neural link disconnected with a sharp pang, leaving an empty ache where the sensation of flight once lived. He felt naked without them, grounded in a way he hadn't been since joining the unit. As they led him away, Leela limped after him, her voice firm. "Wait. He saved me. Doesn't that count?" Holt didn't turn. Take her to medical. This isn't her call. In a holding cell, Jake sat on a metal bench, staring at the wall. He'd lost everything. His rank, his wings, his place in the war. But when the door slid open and Leela stepped in, her leg bandaged but her spirit unbroken, he felt a spark of something new. "They're sending you back to Earth," she said, sitting beside him. "But I owe you. I'm not letting this end here." Jake looked at her, her silver eyes fierce with determination. "Guess we're in this together now," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. Before they could plan further, the outpost shook with a distant explosion. Layla grabbed his arm. "That's no accident. Someone's coming for us." Jake's instincts kicked in. "Then we move. Now." Together, they slipped out of the cell, the war outside growing louder, and a new chapter of their story began, one where rules wouldn't hold them back. The stolen Alliance shuttle rattled as Jake piloted it through the asteroid field orbiting Varuna's outer moons. Rocks the size of houses spun lazily in the void, their jagged edges glinting in the faint light of a distant star. Without his wings, Jake felt the weight of every maneuver, relying on his hands and instincts instead of the neural link he once had. Beside him, Leela worked the co-pilot controls, her silver eyes scanning the sensors. "Krenar ships are still out there," she said, her voice calm but tight. "They're hunting us." Jake adjusted the throttle, weaving the shuttle between two massive asteroids. "Let's make it hard for them. This field's a maze. They'll have to get lucky to catch us." Lila nodded, her fingers tapping the console to boost the shields. The shuttle wasn't much, a banged-up scout vessel they'd grabbed from the outpost before it went up in flames, but it was their only shot. The explosion that rocked the base hadn't been random. Someone wanted them gone, and Jake had a sinking feeling it wasn't just the Krenar. The cabin was cramped, the air thick with the hum of engines and the faint scent of Leela's presence, something warm, like spiced earth. She patched her leg with a medkit from the shuttle, and though she moved stiffly, her focus was sharp. "There's a signal," she said suddenly, pointing to a faint blip on the screen. "It's weak, but it's Alliance tech. Could be a derelict ship." Jake glanced at her. "Worth checking out." She met his gaze, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "If it's got power, we could fix this bucket and get out of here." He angled the shuttle toward the signal, dodging debris with quick, precise movements. The asteroid field was a graveyard of old battles, shattered hulls, and forgotten wrecks floating in silence. When they reached the source, they found a half-destroyed Alliance frigate, its side torn open, but its core still glowing faintly. "Jackpot," Jake muttered, guiding the shuttle into the frigate's docking bay. The landing was rough, metal scraping metal, but they made it. Inside, the frigate was dark and cold, its corridors littered with broken equipment. Jake carried a flashlight scavenged from the shuttle, its beam cutting through the shadows. Layla followed, holding a small toolkit she'd found, her steps echoing softly. "This ship's Illyrian-made," she said, running a hand along a wall panel. "I can work with this." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You're a pilot and a mechanic." She smirked, a rare lightness in her expression. "We Illyrians learn to adapt." "Sound familiar?" They reached the engine room, a cavernous space where the frigate's power core pulsed weakly. Lila knelt by a control unit, her fingers deftly prying it open. "If I reroute the auxiliary power, we can juice up our shuttle. Maybe even get a distress call out." Jake kept watch at the entrance, his hand resting on a scavenged pulse pistol. "Who'd we call?" "Alliance thinks I'm a traitor, and you're a loose end." Leela paused, her hand stilling. "Not everyone. I have friends, people who'd listen if we had proof." "Proof of what?" Jake asked, turning to her. She hesitated, then met his eyes. "Before the crash, I was tracking something. Krenar attacks have been too precise lately, like someone's feeding them intel. I think it's coming from inside the Alliance." Jake frowned, the pieces clicking in his mind. That's why they wanted you dead. And me, for saving you. Lila nodded. Exactly. If we can find data here, we might expose it. They worked together in tense silence, Jake hauling cables while Leela patched circuits. The frigate groaned around them, a reminder of how fragile their shelter was. As the shuttle's power levels climbed, Jake felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could pull this off. But then Lila stopped, her face paling. Jake, look at this. She pointed to a cracked data pad she'd salvaged. Its screen flickered with a partial message. Alliance command compromised. False flag operation imminent. War to escalate. The rest was corrupted, but the meaning was clear. War, Jake said, his voice low. They're setting us up to fight each other. Lila's jaw tightened. Humans and Illyrians both. If the Krenar hit a big target and pin it on one side, no one questions it. Jake ran a hand through his hair, the weight of it sinking in. We need to warn someone. Anyone. Leela shook her head. Not yet. We need hard evidence, or they'll bury us. Before he could reply, the frigate shuddered violently. Alarms blared, and the sensors Leela had rigged lit up with red dots. Krenar ships closing in. They found us, she said, slamming the toolkit shut. Jake grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the shuttle. Time to go. They sprinted through the corridors, the frigate trembling as enemy fire struck its hull. In the docking bay, Jake fired up the shuttle's engines while Leila strapped in. The bay doors were stuck, but Jake didn't flinch. Hold tight, he said, aiming the shuttle's cannons at the weakened metal. A blast tore them open, and he gunned the engines, rocketing out into the asteroid field. Krenar fighters swarmed behind them, their shots lighting up the void. Jake pushed the shuttle to its limits, weaving through the rocks with a grin. Never thought I'd miss my wings this much, he shouted over the noise. Lila gripped the console, her eyes on him. You're doing fine without them. A lucky shot grazed their hull, and warning lights flashed. We won't outrun them, Leela warned. Jake scanned the field, then spotted a cluster of asteroids ahead. We don't have to. Trust me. He veered toward the cluster, cutting the engines at the last second. The shuttle drifted silently, blending into the debris as the Krenar ships sped past, fooled by the trick. In the quiet, Jake turned to Leela. Her breathing was fast, her hand still clutching the seat. Nice move, she said, a small smile breaking through. He shrugged, but his chest warmed at her words. Had to improvise. Human thing. She leaned closer, her silver eyes searching his. I'm starting to like that about you. For a moment, the danger faded, and it was just them. Two souls caught in a storm, finding strength in each other. But the respite was short. Lila's scanner beeped again. They're doubling back, she said. Jake fired up the engines. Then we keep moving. Where to? Leela tapped the console, pulling up coordinates. A neutral station. Harmony Hub. If we can get there, we might find answers. Jake nodded, setting the course. Together. She squeezed his hand. Together. The shuttle streaked through the void, its engines groaning under the strain as Jake pushed it toward Harmony Hub. The asteroid field was behind them, but the Krenar fighters weren't far off, their signals flickering on the edge of Leila's scanner. She sat beside him, her silver eyes locked on the controls, tweaking the ship's systems to squeeze out every bit of speed. We've got maybe an hour before they catch up, she said, her voice steady despite thirst. Jake didn't answer right away, his focus on the stars blurring past the viewport. Harmony Hub was their last hope, a neutral station floating in the buffer zone between human and Illyrian space, a place where traitors, diplomats, and outcasts mingled. If they could get there with the data from the frigate, they might stop the conspiracy threatening to ignite a galaxy-wide war. He glanced at Leela, her violet skin catching the dim glow of the console lights. You think your friends will be there? He asked finally. She nodded, her fingers tightening around a cable she'd jury-rigged to boost the power. Some of them, yeah. They're Illyrians who don't trust the Alliance anymore. If we show them proof, they'll help us get it to the right people." Jake grunted, banking the shuttle around a stray meteor. "Assuming we make it in one piece." The hull rattled as if agreeing with him, a reminder of how battered their little ship was after the escape. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't tense. It was the kind where words weren't needed, just the hum of the engines and the shared rhythm of their breathing. Jake's mind kept drifting to her, to the way she'd trusted him back in the asteroid field, the way her hand had felt in his. He'd lost his wings, his career, everything he'd built, but sitting here with her, he didn't feel empty. He felt alive. "We're close," Leela said, breaking his thoughts. She pulled up a holomap, the station's spires and docks shimmering in green light. "Harmony Hub's got tight security, but I know a back way in. Old smuggler's route." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You're full of surprises." She flashed a grin, quick and bright. "Keeps things interesting, doesn't it?" He couldn't argue with that. As they neared the station, the scanner pinged, a dozen ships patrolling the perimeter. Jake's stomach tightened. "That's more than usual," he muttered. Lila leaned forward, her brow creasing. Krenar signatures mixed with Alliance codes. They're working together. The realization hit them both hard. The conspiracy wasn't just a theory anymore. It was real, and it was here. Jake didn't hesitate. "We're going in hot. Strap in." He angled the shuttle toward the smuggler's route, a narrow gap between two docking arms, barely wide enough for their ship. Leela braced herself, her trust in him unspoken but clear. The station loomed larger, its lights glinting like a promise. Jake's hands danced over the controls, threading the needle as alarms screamed. A Krenar fighter broke off to intercept, its cannons flaring, but Jake rolled the shuttle hard, the blast missing by inches. They shot through the gap, scraping the hull against the station's edge. Sparks flew, and the shuttle lurched, but they were in. Jake sat down in a shadowed maintenance bay, the engines coughing as they powered down. "Rough landing," Leela said, unstrapping with a shaky laugh. Jake smirked. "Still in one piece. That's what counts." They slipped out into the station's underbelly, a maze of pipes and flickering lights. Lila led the way, her steps sure despite the limp she couldn't hide. "My contact's a traitor named Vorn," she whispered. "He'll be in the lower markets." Jake kept his pulse pistol ready, scanning the shadows. The air smelled of oil and burnt wiring, the sounds of bartering drifting up from below. It felt like a place where anything could happen, and probably would. They found Vorn at a cluttered stall, a wiry Illyrian with deep purple skin and a scar across his cheek. He eyed Jake warily, but Leela stepped forward, her voice low. "It's me. We've got trouble, big trouble." She handed him the cracked data pad, its message still legible. Vorn's eyes widened as he read it, his fingers trembling. This could end everything," he said. "War's coming unless we stop it." Jake cut in. "We need to get this to the council meeting upstairs. Human and Illyrian leaders are there now." Vorn hesitated, then nodded. "I've got a passkey, but security's tight. You'll need a distraction." Jake grinned, the kind of grin that meant trouble. "I can handle that. Give me 5 minutes." He didn't wait for approval, slipping back into the crowd with a plan forming fast. He found a fuel canister near a loading dock, rigging it with a spare charge from the shuttle's toolkit. It wasn't elegant, but it made noise. He set it off with a flick of his pistol, and the explosion rocked the bay, sending guards scrambling. Shouts filled the air as Jake darted back to Leela and Vorn. "Time to move," he said, adrenaline pumping. They raced up a service lift, Vorn's passkey buzzing them through locked doors. At the council chamber's edge, they paused. Through a viewport, Jake saw human officers in crisp uniforms and Illyrian delegates in flowing robes, all arguing loudly. Leela clutched the data pad, her breath fast. "We're so close," she said. Jake nodded, but something felt off. The guards weren't chasing them anymore. They were repositioning, like they'd been waiting. Then it hit. An ambush. Krenar soldiers burst from a side corridor, weapons blazing. Jake tackled Leela behind a crate as energy bolts scorched the air. Vorn wasn't fast enough. He went down with a cry, the passkey clattering away. Jake fired back, dropping 2 attackers, but more came. They knew we'd come here. Leela gasped, her eyes wide. Jake's jaw tightened. Someone sold us out. Pinned down, their options shrank. Jake's mind raced, searching for a way out. He spotted a vent above. Tight, but doable. Up there, he said, boosting Leela toward it. She hesitated, her hand on his arm. You first. He shook his head. Not leaving you. Go. She climbed, and he followed, the vent's metal cold against his skin. Inside, they crawled fast, the sounds of pursuit fading. Leela stopped, turning to face him in the dim light. Her silver eyes were fierce, but soft too. You keep saving me, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Jake's heart thudded, louder than the chaos below. Guess I can't help it. She leaned in, her lips brushing his. A quick, electric moment that said more than words could. Then she pulled back, resolve hardening her face. We finish this, together. Jake nodded, the taste of her still lingering. Together. They kept moving, the council chamber close, but the trap tighter than ever. The vent spat Jake and Leela out onto a narrow ledge overlooking the council chamber of Harmony Hub. Below, the room buzzed with tension. Human generals in stiff uniforms traded sharp words with Illyrian delegates draped in shimmering robes. The air crackled with distrust, every voice edged with the threat of war. Jake crouched low, the pulse pistol slick in his grip, while Leela clutched the cracked data pad like it was their last lifeline. Her silver eyes met his, fierce and steady. We've got one shot at this, she whispered. Make it count. Jake nodded, scanning the chamber. Guards flanked the entrances, and a few Krenar soldiers lingered in the shadows, their presence unnoticed by the council. The trap was set. Any moment, they'd strike, pinning the attack on one side to spark the conflict. We need to get that data to the leaders, he said, his mind racing. But we're sitting ducks up here. Leela pointed to a control booth across the room, its screens glowing faintly. If I can patch the pad into their system, everyone sees it at once. No cover-up. Getting there meant crossing open ground, and the Krenar were already twitchy. Jake's eyes landed on a maintenance drone docked nearby. A clunky thing, but it had a power cell he could work with. Cover me, he told Leela, slipping toward it. She nodded, her pistol ready, and he moved fast, prying the cell free with a grunt. He rigged it to overload, a trick he'd learned in Vanguard training, and lobbed it toward the far wall. The explosion was small but loud, a flash of sparks and smoke that sent the council ducking and the guards scrambling. Go, Jake hissed, and they bolted. Leela sprinted for the booth, her limp barely slowing her, while Jake laid down suppressing fire. A Krenar soldier lunged, but Jake sidestepped, slamming the butt of his pistol into its skull. The alien crumpled, and he kept moving, heart pounding. Leela reached the booth, slamming the data pad into a port. Almost there, she muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. The chamber's massive holoscreen flickered, then lit up with the frigate's message. Alliance command compromised. False flag operation imminent. War to escalate. Murmurs rippled through the council. A human general stood, face red. What is this? An Illyrian delegate's voice rose, sharp and clear. Treason from within. Before anyone could answer, the Krenar sprang their trap. Energy bolts tore through the room, and chaos erupted. Jake tackled Leela behind the booth as screams filled the air. They're panicking, she said, peering out. Good. Means they're sloppy. Jake grinned despite the madness. Time to clean up. He grabbed a fallen Krenar rifle, its weight unfamiliar but welcome. Together, they fought back to back, Layla's precise shots dropping enemies, Jake's wilder aim keeping them pinned. The council members rallied, some drawing weapons, others shouting orders. The tide turned fast. The Krenar hadn't expected resistance from both sides at once. Jake spotted their leader, a hulking figure in black armor, and charged, ducking a blast to tackle it to the ground. They grappled, the alien strength overwhelming. But Jake's desperation was sharper. He drove his knee into its chest, then fired point-blank. It went still. Breathing hard, Jake stumbled back to Leela. The chamber was a mess. Bodies on the floor, smoke curling upward. But the fighting had stopped. The holoscreen still glowed. The message looping. A human officer approached, her insignia marking her as a colonel. "You're the renegade vanguard," she said, eyeing Jake. "And you," she turned to Leela, Illyrian scout. Leela straightened. "We're the ones who stopped this." She handed over the data pad. "It's evidence undeniable now." The colonel studied it, then nodded. "This changes everything. You've got a lot to answer for, soldier, but good work." Jake exhaled, the weight of the past days lifting slightly. "Just doing what's right, Mom." She waved them off. "Debrief later. For now, get cleaned up." As she walked away, the council began to regroup, voices rising in debate. But this time, it sounded like unity, not division. Jake and Leela slipped out to a quiet corridor. The station's hum a soft backdrop. She leaned against the wall, her violet skin streaked with dust, and looked at him. "We did it," she said, almost disbelieving. Jake holstered his pistol, stepping closer. "Yeah, guess humans and Illyrians make a decent team." Her laugh was soft, tired, but real. More than decent. The space between them shrank, the air thick with everything they hadn't said. Jake felt that old ache where his wings once connected, but it didn't sting now, it was just a memory. He reached for her, his hand brushing her cheek, warm and smooth. "I lost my wings for you," he said, voice low. "Worth it?" Lila's silver eyes softened, her fingers curling around his. "You didn't lose them. You traded them. For something better." She pulled him in, and their lips met, slow and sure, a promise sealed in the quiet. When they parted, the station's viewport stretched before them, stars blazing beyond. "What now?" Jake asked, his arm around her. Leela rested her head on his shoulder. "We keep going. There's more out there, more fights, more truths. Together." He tightened his grip, a new strength settling in his bones. Together. Days later, they stood on a launch deck, a refitted shuttle waiting. Jake's expulsion was under review, but he didn't care much. He'd found his place. Lila's contacts had spread the word, and whispers of their stand rippled through the galaxy. As they boarded, Jake felt a phantom twitch where his wings had been, but it didn't matter. He couldn't fly anymore, not like before, but with Layla beside him, he soared in a way he'd never imagined. The shuttle lifted off, Harmony Hub shrinking behind them. Ahead lay the unknown. Danger, hope, a future they'd shape. Jake glanced at Leela, her silver hair catching the light, and knew he'd made the right choice. Wings were just metal and circuits. What he'd gained was flesh and fire, a bond that could light up the dark. And as the stars stretched out, endless and bright, he felt ready for whatever came next.